Now, are we going to have a property tax? Yesterday, the International Monetary Fund warned that the government may need to raise billions more in tax, and here the Economic and Social Research Institute advised that the government should consider an ongoing tax on property. It was also one of the main recommendations in last year's report by Colin McCarthy's group on board Snip Nua, who were asked to look at ways to raise money and cut spending. But the government doesn't want to do it. In a moment, we'll get the views of a leading international economic commentator, but first, our reporter Kayleen Rafferty has been asking people in Dublin today how they would feel about paying a tax on their home.
I think it's disgraceful because we already paid enough in stamp duty when we bought our house. So, yeah, it's not appropriate.
We have to get money in some way, so, it depends how much what they're going to put on it. Like if it's 100, 150, that'd be okay, but more than that, I'm not paying.
I suppose it depends how much, really. So, yeah, stamp duty is ridiculous, especially now with everything that happens. So it put a burden on everybody.
Well, we'd probably have to pay it, but we wouldn't be in favour of it. I don't think we should pay more property taxes. We've already paid for the houses, we're paying the mortgages. It's not our problem.
Pay it if I had to, but I think it's unfair. We've all paid stamp duty. I don't see why we should pay again.
I think no would be the answer. Make a mess of it. It's become so complicated that it would just add more confusion and would cost probably more money to collect it than it would be worth.
I wouldn't pay it, no. We don't agree with it at all, no.
I'd understand people paying up to 2 or 3 properties, but I don't think you should pay on the home that you're living in,
The lower income people are always paying tax on everything. That's our opinion.
Pay it if it was a tax, because I'd have to pay it, but I wouldn't agree with it. I just have a mortgage there the last 6 months and it would hit me hard.
If there are the troubles that people have at the moment with mortgages, it's somewhat nonsensical, but the government do need money, so which way does it have to go? I wouldn't have a choice if it was a tax. Obviously, from my own point of view, I'd rather not have to pay it, but if the money isn't there, the money isn't there for the government, so what can you do?
The views of people in Dublin this morning. Well, earlier I spoke to Martin Wolfe, Associate Editor and Chief Economic Commentator with the Financial Times newspaper, and asked him first, did he believe it was a mistake by the government here not to consider a property tax?
Yes, I think there are immensely powerful reasons, particularly for small open economies, which will find it increasingly difficult to tax skilled people and to tax capital, which are highly mobile. It's a great mistake for them not to tax the one thing that is fixed, that can't walk away, which is land. So I think in a globalized economy, that's a very powerful reason for taxing land. Furthermore, a lot of the gains that come from higher incomes, investment in infrastructure by the government, as it were, social investment, accrues to landowners without their doing anything. I don't see why that should happen. That should be allowed. And finally, we've got this credit cycle. So for all these reasons, it seems to me very sensible to try and take a large part of the gain on land prices into taxation.
There are plenty of bodies, both Irish and international, who would advise that we should introduce a property tax, yet many of our listeners who would have paid huge prices for their houses, particularly those who bought in recent years, probably paid enormous stamp duty as well, will feel that they're just being crippled with even higher taxes again.
I think that's absolutely right, and there's a tremendous transitional problem. My own proposal was to sort of, when these prices finally settle down, to take that as the base, so you don't tax, you don't base your tax on the entire value of the property, but you base your tax on the increase in the value from that base, and you can decide what the base is. Basically, my idea is to try and prevent another big bubble. So yes, it's clear that it's very, very hard to introduce a property tax when people have borrowed vast amounts of money against those inflated values and already sitting on huge losses. So we have to take that into account. But I think it's perfectly possible to construct land taxes which do take that into account, which are actually designed, as it were, to tax the incremental gain and that can be done as a flow tax or as a tax on the gain itself, rather than tax the entire value. I think that would indeed be politically very, very difficult in Ireland or indeed in Britain.
You were writing a short time ago in the Financial Times about why the land cycle, both here in Britain and Spain and various other countries, must be halted. Do you get any impression from the kind of policies that we've been introducing since the crash that it will be halted, or are we just going to head for another repeat of this boom and bust, perhaps in a further generation?
Well, I'm unfortunately very convinced that we will, on the basis of what we're doing so far, have another boom-bust cycle. Analysts have suggested the cycle is about 18 years, so it's a very long cycle, quite long enough for everybody to forget what's happened before. We are now going to go through many years of misery with write-offs of debt, sort of cascading losses, dreadful prospects for the public finances. But finally, 5, 6, 7, 8 years from now, the economies will recover. Everybody will start looking at the prices of land and saying, oh, they're so cheap, we must start all over again. And then the bubble all re-emerges. This won't be fixed until we make the gains from and the gains from actually doing useful and honest work, as it were, more attractive. We've got the whole set of rewards from speculation wrong.
Because of the depth of the crash here in Ireland, international commentators and observers like yourself have watched what we've been doing here with interest. How do you think we're coping so far?
Well, that's a very interesting question. We do watch with great interest and some admiration. Certainly, I think the fiscal stringency that has been introduced has been very impressive. In my own view, the Irish government has made what may turn out to be a catastrophically expensive mistake in essentially guaranteeing pretty well all the liabilities of the banking system. That may prove more expensive than, in fact, the Irish economy can afford. I don't know whether that will be the case. We can't be sure yet, but some of the figures I've seen suggest the prospects for national debt as a result of this are very scary. But in terms of the adjustment of the deficit and so forth, I think the Irish response has been very impressive. On the other hand, the bubble that was permitted to emerge in Ireland, the more we read about it, what happened during the boom periods does seem to me really, even by the British standards, and they were bad here, rather shocking.
You said earlier that international commentators have been impressed with the way Ireland has tried to deal with the big gap between spending and the amount of money being taken in. When you say impressed, are you also surprised perhaps at how Irish people have reacted to those changes?
Yes, I think impressed in both respects. Impressed that the government has been brave enough to do it, and impressed that the Irish people have responded, as far as I can see, quite phlegmatically. We are about to go through a very similar process here in the UK under our new government, and I'm not convinced that we will cope with it as phlegmatically as the Irish seem to have done.
When you say phlegmatically, you mean without massive protest and burning things?
Exactly, really? Exactly. I mean, I'm not, of course, trying to compare Ireland with Greece, very different places, but if you look at what could happen, and you can see what's happened in Greece, well, on those sorts of standards, it seems Ireland has coped with it immensely well. I'm concerned we will have massive strikes, maybe even national strikes in the UK in response to the cuts we're going to impose, and these cuts are going to be very unpleasant in many countries. So in this respect, I think the Irish population, the Irish people have shown very, very considerable discipline, and I think that's even more remarkable when it seems to me the gains which sort of were behind the bubble were so unevenly shared, and so much malfeasance, essentially, and incompetence went on in the financial system and in relationship between the financial system and the government. And yet the people still put up with it. I think that's rather impressive.
Martin, thank you very much for speaking to us this afternoon. Martin Wolf, Chief Economic Commentator with the Financial Times.